I'll just say that yeah, it's not universally true that there's such a thing as white privilege. However, I've backpacked through South America and through India. I absolutely had a kind of Western affluent skin color advantage in some ways, and also disadvantage. You know, you get taken advantage of as a tourist.
I know that you can't. I know that you can't know this for sure, but do you think that there were other markers, like for example, markers of wealth, that would have caused them to treat you the same had you been, let's say, a wealthy Chinese tourist or a wealthy Indian?
Absolutely. And that's the whole kind of conceit of intersectionality, is that these things really shouldn't be looked at in isolation because they're intersectional. And I think it's a misinterpretation and misappropriation of the term when the critics strike back and say it's the oppression Olympics, for example, right? There's a modicum of merit to that phrasing, but I don't buy the oppression Olympics as a rebuttal of intersectionality, because I think intersectionality is actually quite a robust empirical kind of both theory and a normative kind of program to draw down those differences.
Well, so I don't think it is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what is it actually purporting to measure? And the other thing too is it doesn't. So I gave you my background, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking about intersectionalism, okay, does intersectionality take into account the fact that I'm Jewish, or does it take into account? I mean, no, it doesn't. But, I mean, intersectional discourse is mostly concerned with, you know, so I mean, the original appearance of intersectionality, which I had to look back into, you know, in order to prepare for this. You know, when Crenshaw wrote about intersectionality, what she was writing about were court cases, particularly of Black women. This was published in Feminist Studies, so you know it's not directly related to critical race theory, although it does end up getting used in it later. In which basically you needed to account for certain, you know, demographic characteristics that happen to do with being both Black and a woman, right? That then put up sort of a compounding barriers, right, to them in particular instances, right? So the fact that they're a woman gives them a certain set of problems that men don't have. The fact that they're Black gives them a certain set of problems that non-Black individuals don't have. And then the fact that they are Black and a woman, you know, the union of those two also creates a whole new set of problems that are particular to that. And so that's basic. You know, I think I did a pretty good job there of stating the main core idea of intersectionality. My issue with intersectionality, I don't deny any of those claims individually. I don't deny the fact that if someone is Black, it's now, again, these are all statistical claims. They're not necessarily true for any particular individual, right?
Right.
So you're making, you're automatically making probabilistic arguments, but let's put that aside for a moment. The fact that you're Black does mean something, particularly in an American context where we have a long history with our Black population of treating them a certain way. Although I will point out that African immigrants to America tend to do better than the local Black population, which tells you that it's not only about their skin color. That being said, I will acknowledge that being a woman means certain things, you know, and certain barriers and certain problems that may come along with it. Being a man does too, right? Depending on, again, this is all contextual, as you pointed out. My big issue is that if we're actually going to try to, well, for one, in what instance does it actually make sense to apply an intersectional analysis? I think often it's being applied in places where it doesn't make sense. And then two, you know, with the Impression Olympics kind of thing, right? I think there is some truth to that, which is that if we want to really get serious about all the ways in which any kind of, you know, characterization of our identity could have affected us and given us an advantage or a disadvantage over someone else. Well, first of all, the comparison that you're measuring to is a non-existent person, right? So who is the most normative human being that is the standard by which we're comparing all other intersections? That doesn't exist. And then the other thing too is, when I look in my own life, and this is partly why I take such personal offense to it, I don't see the intersectional discourse concerned at all with any of the identity categories that would be ascribed to me, except sort of the negative ones, which are that I'm white and a male and heterosexual, right? And so when I I'm going to finish up here in a second.
It's okay.
If I'm going to do an intersectional analysis of me, you could say, okay, the most obvious characteristics are you're white, you're male, you identify as, cis heteronormative, whatever you want to say. Okay, so those are all very surface level things that you could pretty much deduce from just looking at me or interacting with me. But then there are all these other aspects to me that are not going to be taken into account, and largely aren't taken into account when these theories are used. So they're not taking into account the fact that I was born to teenage parents, that I was born to a single mother, that my parents never got married. They're not taking into account that I grew up relatively poor. They're not taking into account the fact that I have a particular genetic condition which predisposes me to certain health issues that nobody would know about unless I told you. They're not taking into account the fact that, again, as I told you earlier, that one of my parents is an immigrant, that I come from a Jewish background that has a whole nother, history of oppression and hardship associated with it. That, again, in my experience, is not something that intersectionality wants to include in their accounting. And I don't think you can. I don't think ultimately you can account for all of those things and do a quantitative analysis of the degrees to which all of those individual facets. And again, you could just keep going on forever and ever about which things count and which things don't. I'm not a particularly tall man. Okay. That has certain disadvantages, as we all know, if you're a taller guy. There are other things like intelligence. If you're not very smart, you're at a disadvantage in this society. I'm sorry. We could go on and on about all of our particularities and all of our uniqueness and grievances that we may or may not have related to them. And that's my biggest issue with the intersectionality. It's just sort of like, well, where does it end? Do we just go on at infinitum? So you could feel free to respond to that.
Yeah, I think I have two main points. One is, there might be an argument to be made that intersectionality has continued to expand and include more and more letters, so to speak, like the LGBTQ, whatever. It's like 15 letters long now. And people complain about this. But at the same time, it is attempting to make a broader, inclusive, deeper argument for some sort of intersectionality. If you let it, right? If you want it. But the other, actually, I have 3 points to make. The other point is that it's a real tragedy and it's heartbreaking that social science ostensibly is trying to make the world a better place, right? All these subdisciplines that we talk about, these are academics teaching and thinking together and rigorously writing, obscure journal articles that nobody reads until it becomes a sensational issue. It's part of a broader Enlightenment project, right? I think fundamentally, putting aside for a moment the critiques of Enlightenment and the renaissance of Enlightenment thinking and whatnot, there's a sort of striving in the right direction, and I'm lamenting it with you because it's so impotent to actually affect the structural problems of the world. And so I think I covered those 2 points sufficiently. The third point is the Jewish thing, because I have strong opinions about Israel, and I'm not Jewish, nor have I even been to Israel, but just as a concerned academic, I'm happy to discuss it, discourse it. And so right off the top, right, there's Zionists and there's anti-Zionist Jews. So the term Jew by no means has a universal meaning, right?
Well,
I mean, we could argue that it does, but with the question of
I'm not going to let you take that away. So here's the thing.